celebrating 17 years of Young Turks.
Okay, so here's a person who is a two-time founder. He passed out of the University of Pennsylvania in 1997. There's a 3-year gap in his LinkedIn history, so I don't know what he was doing then. But in 2000, he started a company.
That sounds more dramatic than it actually is.
So what was it?
I worked for a software company.
You worked for a software company, okay. All right. And then in 2000, he started a company called Espana. Phone cards and some sort of remittance service. Did that for 6 years. Then hopped over, was with a venture capital firm for about a year or so. Decided to start up again with Oyster.com. Oyster.com is a sort of trip advisory service that focused on hotels, a sort of kayak but for hotels. That company again, you ran for about 6 to 7 years.
Yep.
It was acquired by TripAdvisor.
Yeah.
Correct? Then you hopped over again to the venture capital side.
Yes.
You were with General Atlantic for a bit. And that you did for a year or so. Then a profusion of professional roles that brought you to Madge Group. When you joined Madge Group, which is a large US-based conglomerate that runs a lot of services in dating,
Connecting, making friends,
social networks.
Social,
And
many of them are dating.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you spent some time at OkCupid, and we'll talk about that in a bit. And then you hopped over to Tinder in the last year.
That's right.
Have I missed anything?
No, you got it. That's
okay,
right.
all
Yeah,
right.
that's exactly right. That's 22 years of my life in 2 minutes.
So I do want to ask you, Elie, starting out, what prompted you after having spent 3 odd years at a software company to take the plunge and start up a company? What was your thinking then?
I understood, which is, I think, good advice, and still is good advice, that I had very little to lose, right? I had done well, I had gone to a good school, so my worst case scenario was failure. But the failure of that scenario wasn't that bad, right? I was going to have a very, very soft landing, kind of a big, fluffy, pillowy one, probably in a very nice company and a very good job. And I knew that if I fast forwarded 5 or 10 or 15 years, the cost of that risk was going to get higher.
Right.
There's downsides to starting that early and that young, and I'm happy to talk about those, but that was the upside.
What did that 6 years of running Espana really teach you? What were some of the things that from the outside, when you thought of, hey, I'm going to do a startup and I'm really into it, that there was a reality check 1 or 2 years in?
I break startups into 2 parts. There's the part where you're figuring out product market fit. And that's its own very specific problem, right? You're trying and you're endeavoring. And I would say there the main learning is resilience. We literally went to the point of having no money left to pay people. So that's pre-product market fit. Then once you have product market fit, you're faced with a very different problem, which is, I think, also extremely interesting, is how do you get large teams of people to be effective? Business looks very easy on a spreadsheet, and the reality of coordinating and getting a large team to work and have a good culture of how it works together is very complicated. And I learned that, and a friend of mine who worked with me for many years says, it's like going to the gym for business. It's very, very painful, but very, very effective.
Okay. And your biggest lessons in terms of just dealing with people? You work in a company now that deals with people, literally.
Literally, yeah.
But what were some of those early lessons on just managing a team that you've learned, that you've kept with you through your whole professional journey?
The most important one is that the harmony between people is extremely important, and you don't get the chemistry right. And think of now a Tinder example, you need good chemistry, right, in a relationship. The same is true at work. It's not enough that people are smart. And the way to think about it is that if you don't get it right, a lot of the energy of the system starts to work against itself. And if you do get it right, the energy of the system is channeled out into the innovation, into understanding customers, into competitiveness. But it's very easy if you're not right for that energy to be channeled inwards, which is, of course, extraordinarily counterproductive.
The other thing, Elie, about your journey is that you've moved from one thing to the next. You've spent a large amount of time with your startups, and then you've moved roles and positions. When do you know that it's time to move on from something? It's a parallel with Tinder as well. When do you know that, hey, this is not going to work?
I think it's a very tough question. I'll say that what is the easier question to answer is I see people give up far too easily. Most hard problems don't immediately break. If you think about competing in the marketplace and trying to do something that somebody else is already doing, if it was very easy to take what they had done, to take their market share, then their business would not be very valuable. There is a point, though, where the problem is too difficult to crack, and it's something I struggled with. I mean, I wrestled with this at Oyster. Ipana was very successful reasonably quickly. Oyster was much more of a slog. I don't know if that word translates, but we were hammering at that problem for a long time. And ultimately what I realized is that we had made some very slight miscalculations that prevented it from being a truly great business.
Okay, but that's hindsight.
That's hindsight, yeah. At the time it was hard. And I'm very, very persistent. I'm a very, very stubborn person, so.
Yeah, so Oyster was 7 years.
7 years, yeah.
All right, so on that note, let's move on to Tinder. Since it launched in 2012 in the US, it's now present in about 190 countries, about 46 different languages. 26 million people find matches on it every day. And I think that was one of the big questions, is how do you find those matches? And I'm not getting any, but lots of them happening every day. And the app's been downloaded 300 million odd times.
That's right, yeah.
So that's a lot of people everywhere in the world on Tinder. Tell me your own Tinder experience, Elie. Did you know? Yeah? Did you know about the app when you were on the outside back in 2012? Tell us about it.
Yeah, I did. If you think about the number of products that have the same kind of rapid resonance, where they just kind of tear through in word of mouth in popular culture, it's very hard. The number of those that have happened, it's very small. I remember very well when Facebook came out. I was a few years out of college, and they first were launching in the Ivy League schools in the US, first Harvard, and then it went down the kind of east coast of the US, and I remember that, and it just tore through. And I remember very, very distinctly the early days of Tinder, and noticing that, especially since I knew somebody who was one of the founders of a dating app called OkCupid. I'd known him since the beginning of both of our careers.
Okay.
And so I was remarking at the time, probably 2013, wow, something is different now. These apps had been very fringe in the US. Young people didn't use them, and now you have young people using them in droves, and that had changed like that. And so that was immediately obvious. I obviously didn't join Tinder for many years after that.
Why
not? I didn't even think to. I wish I could. I wish I had a better idea. I should have. It would have been a great idea. It's all worked out, obviously.
It would have prepped you well for the role now.
Yeah. So I was already at the time, very much attached to my wife. So, I wasn't able to be a member, but I had been following tech startups, and you can count on two hands the number of tech startups in the past 10 or 15 years that have had that much resonance that quickly.
And what's the sweet spot that Tinder is in right now, right? So that young person, how much have they changed between 2012 and now, and what is therefore your sweet spot today in terms of what Tinder wants to do and how it wants to serve that young person?
Yeah, we're very forward that we are primarily for people in this phase of life, which tends to be for people who are younger. But it's about phase of life versus age. I don't think of it as like a demographic story. I think of it as a life story.
All right.
Right? If you're 18 or 19 or 20, and this is true now in Tokyo, in Paris, here in Delhi, right? Your typical person who's coming to Tinder is not interested yet in saying, hey, I want to get married tomorrow. They will get married in almost all certainty. just not right yet. They're in a phase of life where they're learning about themselves, they're having experiences.
Which brings me to the other point around the offline experience of dating, and the dating fatigue or the dating burnout that we might have in real life, and how an app like Tinder might sort of kind of put that on steroids when you're spending hours a day doing that, as opposed to 2 dates in a week where you have to go see whether you want to do this or not do this, opposed to doing this on a daily basis sometimes, and not finding someone, or finding someone and not working out. Your own thoughts and impressions on that.
Yeah, I think that I like to look at this in a historical context, because it is 6 years into Tinder, and 6 years, more importantly than being into Tinder, 6 years that now young people don't do this as the exception or not at all, but they do this more and more as the norm and the default, right? If you think about that 18 or 19-year-old in Paris or in Tokyo, this is or here in Delhi, it's increasingly becoming the norm, not the exception. And I think that's probably pretty inevitable. So I like to think, and it's all very, very fast. In the history of relationships, of people connecting, we're talking about a blip, a tiny moment in time. So if we go back 20, 30, 40 years, and you live in a small town with 200 people, and you've met everybody in the small town, and you want to meet new people, you probably went to a friend or to an aunt or to your mom, and they would introduce you. And there was a person you went to who helped you and who did the job of making introductions. And we think of that as being perfectly normal. And they would, of course, hopefully know some more people in the next town. And I would say for that person, the lack of volume was a problem. Right. We are, in the modern terms, that mom, that aunt, that friend. That's the job that we, with the community of people on Tinder, are doing. And we've solved, in a lot of ways, the problem of volume. But
there are other problems, right, that technology throws up. And in that context, Elie, tell us a little bit about where you see Tinder going from here, right? What are the things, like any other platform, there are things that are broken or things that are missed, that things in its own natural evolution need to be taken care of. To your own mind, what is priority for you to take care of on a platform like Tinder?
Yeah, so without going into like a very specific and announcing something, I would say I'll tell you what the whole journey we think about. And an easy way to think about it is somebody who joined Tinder at 18 or 19 in 2013. 5 or so years ago, right? They're still very young. They're 23 or 24 years old. They may not be ready to get married yet, although that's coming, right? Their settling down phase, their permanent relationship is coming at some point in all likelihood. How does the product adapt to these phases, right? They're not the person they were at 18. That's obvious. We know that. And we instinctively, because we all have this experience, we know we're growing and changing during that time. And we want the product to be adaptive and recognize that the 18-year-old and the 24-year-old you are different, and the product is sensitive to it.
All right. So kind of capturing the life journey of a person, putting in more experiences, what are some of the things that we might expect?
You'll have to wait and see. It's an area, I think that didn't need a ton of attention from a business perspective, right? The challenge of the past 5 or 6 years was, wow, this thing is growing like crazy. How do we get it into all the languages? How do we support it technically? How do we scale? And now we're getting a little bit of time to take a step back and say, oh, we do have members who have been with us on and off and on and off and have grown themselves. And so the problem of the member that we're trying to solve is a different one. They're more varied.
Let's talk about consumers, and let's talk about the India story. Tell us about if your team here, whether how closely you look at India. I know that's one of your bigger markets in Asia. Give us a sense of how the app gets used here. Is it very different from how it gets used in the US or in Europe, for instance? Also talk us through some of the interesting localizations for this market.
So there's a few different parts there, right? I think that It's the biggest market in all of Asia for us. It is our biggest market today. It's also the one we were in first. We established an office here that Taru runs 3 and something years ago now. So we've been here for a while and we've actually built a good business here. We're the #2 grossing app in the App Store, which surprises a lot of people. So it's become a legitimately good business for us, which I think a lot of people actually weren't expecting. And so I think that tells you a lot already.
That there's a need in the market and young people want to use it.
And furthermore, that a small percentage of them, like in other markets, are willing to pay, right? And that's a really important idea in a market that I think people here have told me is very, very value conscious. Right. The fact that people are willing to pay tells you a lot about the importance of the service. That makes sense, right? It's attached to probably the most important part of our lives. In terms of localization, I really think about one core thing, and it's true for India, and it will be true elsewhere as well. The hardest part of using an app like Tinder is how do you express yourself? How do you, to what I was saying before, show yourself in a way that other people can see who you are? And I know how to do that, right? And our product managers, and Taru knows how to do that, but I want the 310th million person who walks in the door to have all of the benefit, and I want it to be local specific. I want it to be culture specific. You know, there is no, this is an important idea, there is no one Tinder. There is a Tinder of your culture and your local community. And each one of those is a little bit different. Easy examples, a 25-year-old in Tokyo and an 18-year-old in a college campus in the US are different. They're different people and different cultures, different social dynamics, different phases of life. So there is no one, and so we have to be thoughtful of how do we help you based on where you are in your life and where you are in the world, self-express. And I think we have a lot of localization to do, and I would expect, you know, one of the great exports of India, of course, has been technical know-how and innovation, both directly from the market, but also, of course, Indians who have gone to Silicon Valley and built amazing things. And so we look at this market as a place where we will get insights and innovations to help us understand how we localize to each culture, for India, of course, but in a more abstracted, general sense.
But how does that work, Elie? Do you have product teams in different parts of the world, or is it all sort of central with just inputs coming from you know, each of these markets and what you need to do in those markets? And I'm asking you this because we have a lot of domestic players as well, right, yes, that are in this space. So I'm asking you from that perspective of how do you deal with domestic competition, not another American company trying to do what they're doing here.
We think of our local presence, and we have a local presence in India. It's actually, I think, the very first non-US presence we have, as being more like marketers and product managers. We actually write the code in a combination of Los Angeles and Silicon Valley. We have an office, a significant engineering office in Palo Alto. But ultimately, you know, the code you write is derived from the market insights you have, and we want to get our market insights for India from the India team. Okay,
all right. So we're going to wind this conversation down, and I'm going to take some audience questions as well. I believe there were about 1,500 odd questions that came in, but these are some of the most popular ones. What would you have been doing, Elie, if you were not doing Tinder?
My wife and I often talk about, you know, what would happen, what will you be doing in 5 years, and I feel like I've been very bad at predicting that.
Yeah.
So I love businesses that combine technology and people, and I've tried as I've gotten older to do more of those two things. I love consumer problems and things that help people in their real lives.
All right, when you say impactful company, do you mean the number of people just in the world that you're impacting with stuff that you do on Tinder, given that it's such a sort of culture defining company in that sense, right? Now, whether it's dictating culture, it's actually just picking up from culture, is a debate, right? And we'll know in the next 10 years.
That's right, yeah. I think that the cultural impact is the right way to think about it. You know, I think, you know, I don't think you can separate what is doing what. They're deeply intertangled.
I think this was one of the most popular questions. How can we get more matches on Tinder?
the tactical, the more like really direct answer is, it's a visual medium. You know, phones are a visual medium. And so you want to tell your story of who you are with photos. Words help, but in Tinder in particular, and by the way, most of the other apps.
But that's another criticism, right? I know that The Atlantic and the NYT had like a long piece on this about how it's, this kind of thing has made dating more superficial and more just about that selfie or that picture than anything else about who you are and what your motivations are and so on.
Yeah, I don't agree actually.
Why not?
Because I think that the truth is that in real life, this is the first way we assess things. We're highly visual people. That's how we process the world. And so if you went, for example, to a friend's party, maybe your mom is throwing a party or an aunt and they bring somebody over that they would like you to meet, you will make a very quick decision. Let's say you're set up on a blind date. And many people probably in this room have been set up on a blind date. And you get there, and in the first minute, you know this is going nowhere. There's no chemistry, right? It didn't click. And so I think actually the reason Tinder has been so successful and that the design of it has been so successful, right? And it's really been orders of magnitude more successful than anything else, copied many, many times at this point, is because it's more honest. It's more like real life. It's not a fake version.
One thing about technology today and platforms today that scares you?
That I think a lot of people are thinking about a lot, and I think we need to think about a lot, is these devices are very powerful and they captivate us, right? We're watching our movies on them, our short clips. People will watch this on a small device, right? And some of that, in fact, a lot of it happens alone. One of the things I love about our mission is we literally say in the mission that our goal is to get you off your device into the real world and meet in real life. That is the goal. And I think now more than ever, getting back to real life is important. I don't think it means we're going to give these things up. But I do think we're working through as a society and as consumers and also producers of what is the right balance. And it's a work in progress.
A work in progress, okay. What do you see as your biggest responsibility as a CEO?
4 or 5 major things. There is the what. What are we working on? And it's my responsibility, with obviously a lot of input and counsel from the team, what are we working on? Why? Why is extraordinarily important? People come to a job and they work very hard. They're giving a huge part of themselves to this job. And I think we owe them, as leaders, a really good answer as to why. What is our mission? What is our impact on the world? Then there's the how, and how is interpreted differently, but I think of it as culture. How we come together, how we work together is extraordinarily important and defines our experience. And so those are the things that I spend almost all of my time on.
How do you deal with failure?
The long answer is that failure is terrible. It's a very, very, very unpleasant experience, and I've had it. If you work very, very hard on something for a very long time and you really give your soul to it, you give your passion and your energy, when it doesn't work is extraordinarily disappointing. A little bit like a bad breakup, heartbreak, right? It takes time. Time is required to heal it. It feels terrible the first week, still pretty bad, and eventually gets better. The good news, and this is I think a very important lesson in life, is that when you fail, what it does for you is it makes you realize, wait, that didn't kill me. I'm still here. The sun came up. And it actually emboldens you for the next time because, look, it wasn't pleasant. I don't want it to happen again. I should not seek failure, but I know that if it does happen, I'll survive it.
It's interesting because this also ties in with what you're trying to do now with Tinder and Tinder Swipe Life, which is like your content platform that's attached to Tinder, which is say that, okay, if one date doesn't work out, it's all right, it's not the end of life. Sensitization for people on what they should expect or not over-expect from Tinder?
Or not over-expect from life. I think we represent the reality more and more because of just the sheer scale. We have a very unique seat. And so we get to see real life at scale. And I think that, coming with too much expectation for exactly when things are going to happen is a bad idea in your personal professional career, and I think it can be very challenging in your personal life too. What I've seen, by the way, over now 22 years of professional life, is the people who I know who are smart and worked hard and were very resilient and constantly growing, inevitably were successful. The hardest part was predicting when, but it did work out in the end. So there's a happy ending there. But the people who said it has to happen by year 1 or 2 or 3 were inevitably very disappointed. And so I think there's a parallel.
And on that note, thank you very much, Elie, for that conversation.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.